Hey there, knowledge seekers! This is your ultimate destination for discovering the past, understanding the present, and imagining the future. Every video here is a window into a world of wonder, so let your curiosity guide you. Now we explore, explain the British Empire, globalization, and colonization.
Origins and rise of the British Empire. The British Empire, one of the most influential and expansive empires in world history, was not an overnight phenomenon. Its emergence and subsequent rise were the result of a complex interplay of economic ambitions, political developments, technological advancements, and cultural transformations that spanned several centuries. Understanding the origins of the British Empire requires an examination of England's internal dynamics, its maritime prowess, and the global context in which it sought to expand its influence. This essay explores the foundational elements that led to the formation of the British Empire, tracing its early roots in the late medieval period, the motivations behind colonization, and the mechanisms that enabled England to become a dominant global power. 1. Early foundations and political consolidation. The political unification and centralization of power in England during the late medieval period provided the necessary conditions for overseas expansion. Following the turmoil of the Wars of the Roses, 1455 to 1487, the Tudor dynasty, beginning with Henry VII, established relative political stability. This stability allowed the monarchy to consolidate power, create a stronger administrative structure, and foster economic growth. A unified state with a centralized authority was critical for supporting long-distance maritime ventures, which required substantial resources and coordination. During this period, England also experienced significant developments in governance and finance. The establishment of a more effective taxation system and the creation of state institutions enabled the monarchy to mobilize resources for exploration and military endeavors. Moreover, the Tudor monarchs recognized the importance of maritime exploration in enhancing England's economic and strategic position. Figures such as John Cabot, who explored the North American coast in 1497 under the English flag, represented the beginning of England's overseas ambitions. Although these early voyages were modest compared to later expeditions, they laid the groundwork for England's maritime identity and its aspirations to compete with other European powers. 2. Economic motivations in the Age of Exploration. The 16th century marked the beginning of the Age of Exploration, driven primarily for economic motives. European nations were seeking new trade routes to access the wealth of Asia, particularly spices, silk, and other luxury goods. Spain and Portugal initially led this movement, establishing lucrative overseas empires. England, eager to participate in global trade, began investing in exploratory voyages and the establishment of trading companies. The formation of joint stock companies, such as the East India Company in 1600, was a significant innovation that facilitated large-scale commercial ventures. These companies allowed investors to pool resources, share risks, and profit from overseas trade, creating a model that would underpin much of the British Empire's economic expansion. The economic motivations behind colonization were closely intertwined with domestic developments. England's population was growing, and the country faced social and economic pressures, including unemployment and the enclosure movement, which displaced rural populations from traditional farmland. Colonization offered a solution to these pressures by providing new lands for settlement, new markets for goods, and opportunities for economic advancement. The promise of wealth from trade and the extraction of resources abroad became a driving force behind England's overseas ventures. Maritime technology and naval power. A critical factor in England's rise as a global power was its development of advanced maritime technology and naval capability. By the late 16th century, England had developed a strong and increasingly sophisticated navy, which allowed it to protect trade routes, explore distant lands, and project power abroad. Innovations in shipbuilding, navigation, and cartography enabled English explorers to undertake long and perilous voyages across the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. The use of the galleon, a heavily armed and maneuverable ship, allowed England to compete militarily with other European powers and protect its commercial interests. The Navy also played a crucial role in the conflicts that shaped the early empire. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 not only secured England from invasion, but also demonstrated its naval prowess to the world. This victory boosted national confidence and marked the beginning of England's emergence as a formidable maritime power. Control of the seas became a central element of imperial strategy, allowing England to expand its influence far beyond its borders and establish the foundations for global trade networks. IV. Early colonization in the Americas. The early 17th century saw England's first significant attempts at overseas colonization. The establishment of Jamestown in Virginia in 1607 marked the beginning of England's permanent presence in the Americas. Despite initial hardships, including disease, famine, and conflicts with indigenous peoples, the colony eventually stabilized and laid the groundwork for further expansion. The success of Jamestown was driven by the cultivation of tobacco, a highly profitable cash crop that created economic incentives for continued colonization. Other colonies soon followed, including settlements in New England, the Caribbean, and the southern parts of North America. Each of these colonies had distinct characteristics, reflecting regional differences in climate, resources, and economic priorities. In the Caribbean, sugar cultivation became the primary economic activity, relying heavily on enslaved African labor. In New England, the economy was more diversified, with trade, fishing, and small-scale agriculture playing important roles. The early colonial experience taught England valuable lessons in governance, trade, and diplomacy, which would inform its later imperial strategies.
V. Competition with European powers. England's imperial ambitions did not exist in a vacuum. They were shaped by competition with other European powers, particularly Spain, Portugal, France, and the Netherlands. The Treaty of Tordesillas, 1494, had initially divided the non-European world between Spain and Portugal, limiting English expansion. However, England's persistent maritime ventures and privateering challenged these territorial claims. English privateers such as Sir Francis Drake not only attacked Spanish ships, but also claimed territories on behalf of the English crown, asserting England's presence in the Americas and beyond. Conflict and competition fostered innovation and adaptability. English colonists learned to navigate complex political landscapes, negotiate with indigenous populations, and develop economic models that could sustain colonies despite hostile conditions. The interplay of rivalry and cooperation among European powers created a dynamic environment in which England could gradually expand its influence, ultimately laying the foundations for a global empire. 6. Cultural and ideological foundations. Cultural and ideological factors also played a role in the rise of the British Empire. The Protestant Reformation, which began in the early 16th century, shaped English national identity and influenced attitudes toward expansion. Religious motivations, including the desire to spread Protestantism and counter Catholic influence, often intertwined with economic and strategic objectives. Additionally, ideas of national destiny, commercial enterprise, and civilizational superiority provided intellectual justification for colonization and imperial expansion. English literature, art, and scientific inquiry of the period reflected and reinforced these ambitions. Travel narratives, maps, and accounts of foreign lands captured the imagination of the public and encouraged further exploration. The development of a commercial and scientific mindset fostered an environment in which the pursuit of wealth, knowledge, and power became interconnected, providing the cultural underpinnings for empire. 7. Transition to a global empire. By the late 17th century, England had established a network of colonies, trading posts, and naval bases that spanned multiple continents. The acquisition of territories in the Americas, Africa, and Asia signaled the transformation from a regional power to a global empire. Strategic locations such as Jamaica in the Caribbean and Bombay in India became key nodes in a burgeoning system of global trade.
These holdings allowed England to access resources, control trade routes, and influence political developments far beyond its borders. The evolution of the British Empire during this period was not linear or uniform. It involved experimentation, adaptation, and occasional failure. Colonies were often fragile, vulnerable to internal strife, economic instability, and external threats. Yet the cumulative effect of early exploration, colonization, and commercial ventures laid the foundation for an empire that would become one of the largest and most influential in history. The rise of the British Empire was the product of multiple interconnected factors, including political consolidation, economic ambition, maritime innovation, competition with European rivals, and cultural ideology. From the early voyages of exploration to the establishment of permanent colonies, England gradually transformed from a relatively modest European kingdom into a global power. The foundations laid during this period would shape the trajectory of the empire for centuries, influencing trade, politics, culture, and the lives of millions around the world. Understanding these early developments is essential for comprehending the later expansion and global dominance of the British Empire.
The 18th and 19th centuries marked the period of greatest expansion for the British Empire, a time when it transformed from a collection of scattered colonies into a vast global power, encompassing territories on every inhabited continent. This expansion was driven by economic ambitions, military conquests, strategic diplomacy, and ideological justifications rooted in a sense of cultural and civilizational superiority. Equally important was the development of governance structures and social systems that allowed the British to administer diverse and distant territories. This essay examines the mechanisms of expansion, the administration of colonies, and the profound cultural impacts of British imperialism on both the colonizers and the colonized. 1. Expansion through conquest and trade. The expansion of the British Empire was fueled by both military conquest and commercial enterprise. In India, the East India Company gradually established dominance through a combination of diplomacy, alliances, and military campaigns. Starting with trading posts along the coast, the company eventually controlled vast territories by the mid-18th century following pivotal battles such as Plassey (1757) and Buxar (1764). The success in India reflected the British ability to exploit local political rivalries, adapt to unfamiliar environments, and integrate economic and military strategies to consolidate power. In the Caribbean, the British focused on acquiring islands that could serve as profitable centers for sugar production. Territories such as Jamaica, Barbados, and Trinidad became key components of the empire, generating immense wealth through plantation economies that relied on enslaved African labor. These colonies not only provided economic returns but also strengthened Britain's strategic position in the Atlantic, allowing it to control key maritime routes and project power across the region. In North America, British expansion was more complex. The 13 colonies developed a distinct society influenced by local conditions, British law, and Enlightenment ideas. The colonies became centers of trade, agriculture, and culture, contributing to the empire's economic strength. However, tensions over governance, taxation, and representation eventually culminated in the American Revolution 1775 to 1783, resulting in the loss of the American colonies, but also prompting the British to focus on other parts of the world, including India, Africa, and the Pacific. 2. Governance and colonial administration. Administering a vast empire required the development of governance structures capable of maintaining control over diverse populations and territories. The British employed a combination of direct and indirect rule, adapting their methods to local conditions. In India, the East India Company initially exercised direct control over its territories, with British officials overseeing administration, taxation, and justice. After the rebellion of 1857, the British Crown assumed direct control, establishing the British Raj with a more formal bureaucratic structure that integrated British and Indian administrators. In Africa, indirect rule became a common strategy, particularly in territories such as Nigeria and Uganda. The British relied on existing local authorities such as chiefs and kings to govern on their behalf, while retaining ultimate control over military and economic matters. This approach allowed the British to manage large and diverse populations with relatively limited resources, while simultaneously shaping social and political structures to align with imperial objectives.
Colonial governance also involved the imposition of British legal systems, educational models, and administrative practices. Courts, schools, and local councils were established to instill British norms and facilitate control. Education, in particular, became a tool for creating a class of intermediaries who could serve as bureaucrats, clerks, and professionals within the colonial system. This strategy helped consolidate British authority while promoting social and cultural transformation in the colonies. Economic exploitation was at the heart of the British Empire's expansion. The empire established extensive trade networks connecting colonies, metropolis, and markets across the globe. The mercantile system encouraged colonies to produce raw materials such as cotton, sugar, tea, and rubber, which were shipped to Britain for processing and resale. Manufactured goods were then sold back to the colonies or exported to other markets, creating a system that maximized profit and reinforced Britain's economic dominance. Plantation economies, particularly in the Caribbean and parts of Africa, relied heavily on enslaved labor until the abolition of slavery in the 19th century. The transatlantic slave trade, though morally reprehensible, provided the labor foundation for the production of lucrative cash crops, fueling British wealth and investment. Following abolition, new labor systems, including indentured servitude and wage labor, were introduced to maintain production and economic stability. In India, the British transformed traditional agricultural practices and trade patterns to serve imperial interests. Cash crops such as cotton and opium were promoted for export, while local industries, including textiles, were systematically undermined to eliminate competition with British manufactured goods. Railways, ports, and telegraph systems were developed to facilitate resource extraction and trade, laying the infrastructure for modern economic networks, but often prioritizing imperial profit over local development. The cultural impact of the British Empire was profound, affecting both colonizers and the colonized. British culture, language, and institutions were spread widely, creating a sense of shared identity among imperial officials and settlers. English became the medium of administration, education, and trade, while British legal and political systems were introduced to establish order and legitimacy. Colonial societies, however, were not passive recipients of British culture. Indigenous populations adopted, resisted, and negotiated with imperial authorities in complex ways. In India, movements such as the Indian National Congress emerged to articulate political grievances and demand greater autonomy. In Africa, leaders and communities navigated the pressures of colonial rule through a combination of accommodation, negotiation, and rebellion. The cultural encounters of empire were therefore dynamic, producing hybrid forms of identity, social change, and resistance.
5. Science, technology, and knowledge production. The British Empire was also a vehicle for the global circulation of scientific knowledge, technology, and intellectual ideas. Botanical gardens, museums, and research institutions were established in colonies to study natural resources, classify flora and fauna, and facilitate agricultural and industrial development. Advances in cartography, navigation, and engineering were applied to imperial projects, including railways, telegraph lines, and ports, enhancing Britain's ability to control and exploit distant territories. The collection and dissemination of knowledge served both practical and ideological purposes. Scientific endeavors justified imperial expansion by framing the colonized world as a space for observation, classification, and improvement. At the same time, knowledge production reinforced British authority, as expertise in administration, medicine, and engineering became associated with the power and legitimacy of empire. 6. Social structures and labor systems. Imperial expansion also reshaped social structures within both Britain and its colonies. In the colonies, hierarchies were established that privileged British officials, settlers, and intermediaries, while subordinating indigenous populations. In India, for example, British policies reinforced social stratification, co-opting local elites while marginalizing others. Similarly, in Africa and the Caribbean, racialized labor systems and legal codes institutionalized inequality and exploitation. Migration and settlement patterns were influenced by imperial needs. British settlers established colonies in North America, Australia, and New Zealand, bringing European social norms, institutions, and cultural practices with them. At the same time, labor migrations, including indentured servitude and forced relocation, created multi-ethnic societies with complex social dynamics. The British Empire thus transformed demographics, labor relations, and social hierarchies on a global scale. 7. Resistance and adaptation. Resistance to British imperial rule was widespread and took many forms, from armed rebellion to cultural preservation and intellectual critique. In India, uprisings such as the Rebellion of 1857 reflected deep resentment against British authority, economic exploitation, and social interference. In Africa, leaders like Shaka Zulu, Samiri Toure, and Menelik II challenged colonial incursions through military and diplomatic strategies. Indigenous communities in the Americas, the Pacific, and Southeast Asia also resisted British domination, employing tactics ranging from guerrilla warfare to negotiation and adaptation. At the same time, adaptation and accommodation were crucial for the empire's sustainability. Colonial subjects often engaged with British institutions, learning new languages, adopting new technologies, and participating in imperial economies. This dual process of resistance and adaptation created complex societies in which colonial power was contested, negotiated, and reshaped continuously. The British Empire's expansion, governance, and cultural impact during the 18th and 19th centuries were driven by a combination of economic ambitions, military power, administrative innovation, and ideological justification. The empire's reach extended across continents, creating global trade networks, transforming social and political systems, and shaping cultural identities. At the same time, resistance and adaptation by colonized peoples highlighted the dynamic and contested nature of imperial authority. The legacies of this period, economic, cultural, technological, and political, continued to influence the world long after the empire's territorial peak, setting the stage for the challenges and transformations of the 20th century.
The British Empire, once the largest empire in history, faced a gradual decline beginning in the late 19th century and accelerating in the 20th century. Its contraction was the result of complex political, economic, and social pressures, combined with rising nationalism and global geopolitical shifts. Despite the loss of formal territories, the British Empire left enduring legacies that continued to shape international relations, economies, legal systems, and cultures worldwide. This essay examines the factors that contributed to the decline of the empire, the processes of decolonization, and the lasting impacts of British imperialism. Challenges to imperial authority. By the late 19th century, the British Empire confronted a series of internal and external challenges that undermined its authority. Domestically, the costs of maintaining a vast empire placed significant strain on the British economy and political system. The administration of distant colonies required substantial financial and human resources, while imperial wars and military campaigns drained national coffers. Additionally, debates within Britain about the moral, economic, and political justification for empire created tensions that weakened public support for imperial expansion. Externally, other emerging powers, particularly Germany, the United States, and Japan, challenged Britain's global dominance. The rise of industrialization and modern military technology enabled these nations to compete economically and militarily, reducing Britain's relative advantage. Conflicts such as the Boer War, 1899 to 1902, exposed vulnerabilities in British control and highlighted the limits of military power in maintaining imperial rule. The combination of internal strains and external competition set the stage for a period of reevaluation and retrenchment. 2. Nationalism and the push for independence. A key factor in the decline of the British Empire was the rise of nationalist movements in colonized territories. Across Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean, local populations increasingly demanded political autonomy, social reform, and economic self-determination. In India, the Indian National Congress and later the Muslim League mobilized broad-based support for independence, advocating constitutional reforms, civil disobedience, and eventually complete sovereignty. Leaders such as Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah combined political strategy with moral authority, inspiring mass movements that challenged British legitimacy. In Africa, anti-colonial movements gained momentum during the mid-20th century, particularly following World War II. Figures like Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya, and Nelson Mandela in South Africa exemplified the struggle for independence and racial equality. Grassroots activism, labor strikes, and political organization forced Britain to reconsider its approach to colonial governance. Across the Caribbean and Southeast Asia, similar movements emerged, reflecting a global wave of resistance to imperial domination. 3. Economic and geopolitical factors in decline. Economic transformations in the 20th century contributed significantly to the empire's decline. The World Wars, World War I and World War II, severely weakened Britain's economic and military capabilities. The financial costs of war, combined with the destruction of infrastructure and loss of trade dominance, diminished Britain's capacity to maintain overseas colonies. Simultaneously, the global economy became more interconnected, with the United States and Soviet Union emerging as dominant powers, reducing Britain's relative influence.
Geopolitically, Britain faced pressure from both allies and adversaries to grant independence to colonies. The establishment of the United Nations and the promotion of self-determination after World War II created international expectations for decolonization. Britain's strategic interests required cooperation with newly independent states, particularly as Cold War dynamics introduced ideological competition. Consequently, Britain increasingly adopted a pragmatic approach, negotiating transitions to independence rather than attempting to maintain direct control. Decolonization and the end of empire. The process of decolonization unfolded over several decades, often through negotiation, but sometimes through conflict. India's independence in 1947 marked a turning point, demonstrating that Britain could no longer rely on coercion alone to maintain its empire. The partition of India into India and Pakistan was accompanied by massive population displacement and violence, highlighting the complex challenges of transitioning from colonial rule. In Africa, decolonization occurred largely during the 1950s and 1960s, with Britain granting independence to former colonies such as Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, and Tanzania. In some cases, independence followed negotiated settlements, while in others, anti-colonial struggle and armed resistance played a decisive role. In the Caribbean, islands such as Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and Barbados achieved independence, often through political and constitutional processes. The empire's retreat was not uniform, reflecting regional differences in resistance, negotiation, and strategic importance. Cultural, social, and political legacies. Although the British Empire formally receded, its cultural, social, and political legacies endured globally. English language and legal systems continue to serve as unifying frameworks across former colonies, facilitating trade, diplomacy, and education. Parliamentary institutions, constitutional principles, and bureaucratic practices introduced during colonial rule shaped the governance structures of many independent nations. Cultural influence also persists through literature, education, media, and social norms. The spread of British cultural institutions, including schools, universities, and literary traditions, created enduring connections among former colonies. Sports such as cricket and football became important cultural linkages, promoting shared identity and international competition. Socially, the empire left complex legacies in terms of race, ethnicity, and migration.
Colonial policies often institutionalized hierarchical structures, creating long-term social stratification. Migration from former colonies to Britain created multicultural societies, transforming demographics and social dynamics within the United Kingdom itself. The interplay between colonizer and colonized societies produced hybrid cultures, languages, and identities that reflect the historical encounter between Britain and its former territories. Economic legacies and global trade. The British Empire shaped global trade patterns that persist today. The integration of colonies into international markets facilitated the movement of goods, capital, and labor on a global scale. While colonial economies were often exploitative, the infrastructure developed during the imperial period, including railways, ports, and communication networks, laid the foundations for modern economic development in many regions. Global financial institutions, corporate networks, and trade practices established under the empire influenced economic relationships long after independence. Former colonies often maintained close economic ties with Britain, participating in preferential trade agreements, investments, and development initiatives. The persistence of these economic linkages demonstrates the enduring influence of imperial structures in shaping contemporary globalization. Memory, historiography, and post-colonial reflection.
The history of the British Empire has been subject to extensive scholarly debate and reflection. Historians have examined both the achievements and the abuses of imperial rule, analyzing the ways in which empire shaped identities, economies, and political structures. Post-colonial studies have highlighted the perspectives of colonized peoples, emphasizing resistance, agency, and the consequences of imperial domination. Memory of the empire continues to influence politics and culture in both Britain and former colonies. Monuments, museums, and commemorative practices reflect contested narratives of imperial history. Debates over colonial reparations, cultural restitution, and historical accountability underscore the ongoing significance of the empire's legacy in contemporary society. Following decolonization, Britain redefined its role in the world. The United Kingdom transitioned from a global empire to a leading member of international organizations, including the United Nations, NATO, and the Commonwealth of Nations. The Commonwealth, in particular, represents a voluntary association of former colonies and Britain, emphasizing cooperation, shared values, and cultural exchange. This post-imperial framework allowed Britain to maintain influence, albeit through diplomatic, cultural, and economic means rather than territorial control. Britain's global identity evolved in response to geopolitical changes, economic challenges, and domestic transformation. The nation's imperial past continues to shape its foreign policy, trade relations, and cultural engagement with former colonies. In this sense, the end of formal empire did not erase the connections forged over centuries of expansion, colonization, and interaction. The decline and decolonization of the British Empire were driven by a combination of internal weaknesses, nationalist movements, global economic shifts, and geopolitical pressures. While formal imperial rule ended, the empire's legacies continue to influence contemporary politics, economics, culture, and society. The British Empire left a complex inheritance, encompassing both achievements and injustices, shaping the modern world in profound ways. Its history offers critical insights into the dynamics of power, globalization, and human interaction across continents, illustrating how imperial ambition and local agency together forged a world that remains interconnected today.
The journey never ends. The story ends here, but the journey of knowledge never stops. Subscribe to our channel, stay inspired, and be ready, because the next chapter begins soon.